Okinawa, 1945. The island was bleeding, and so was the sky. Smoke clung to the earth like a living thing, swallowing the cries of men and the hiss of burning trees. To the north, the ocean kept crashing against the shore, indifferent to who lived or died on its edge. Among the wounded and the dying, a young Japanese nurse named Aiko Tanaka knelt beside a fallen soldier. Her hands trembled, not from exhaustion but from the certainty that the end was near. She had run out of bandages 3 hours ago, out of morphine 2 days before that. What she still had left, fear, loyalty, and the faint echo of her training, felt like nothing against the chaos roaring around her. When the bombardment stopped, silence didn't return. It was replaced by a new sound. Voices, English, heavy boots in the mud. Aiko froze where she knelt. The enemy had come. She pressed her blood-stained sleeve to her lips, whispering the prayer her instructors had taught her. Better death than disgrace. The tent flap burst open. Light spilled in, slicing through the haze of dust and smoke. An American soldier stepped inside, his rifle raised but not aimed. Behind him, others followed, their expressions unreadable. Aiko shut her eyes, waiting for the violence she had been taught to expect. But the blow never came. Instead, someone knelt beside her. A man's voice, calm, gentle, almost hesitant, broke the air. "It's all right," he said in slow English. The morning after the battle, Okinawa was quiet in the most unsettling way. The noise had stopped, but peace hadn't arrived. It simply hovered, wounded and unsure. Aiko awoke to footsteps outside her tent. An American voice called her name carefully, as though afraid it might break. When she stepped outside, the air smelled of salt and burned earth. Lieutenant Hayes stood waiting with a clipboard under his arm. "You're being transferred," he said. "We're moving north. Guam." The word felt foreign on her tongue. Guam. She had seen it written on the maps they studied before the war. Always colored red, always labeled enemy territory. Now, she was being sent there not as a nurse of the Emperor, but as a prisoner of war. The transport ship rocked through gray water for days. The ocean was endless, and so was her uncertainty. Around her, a dozen Japanese nurses sat in silence. Some whispered prayers. Others stared at the horizon as if they could see home in the distance. When the ship finally anchored at Naval Hospital Guam, the women stepped onto the dock in borrowed American uniforms, plain khaki dresses with the red cross stitched awkwardly where the imperial crest used to be. It was humiliating, but there was something strangely cleansing about it, too. The camp was nothing like Okinawa. It was too clean, too calm, too alive. Rows of white tents stretched under the palm trees, the air heavy with antiseptic instead of gunpowder. There were no screams, no distant shell fire, just the soft hum of generators and the occasional rustle of nurses' shoes across gravel. Aiko didn't expect to see Hayes again. But when she entered Ward 14, there he was, sleeves rolled up, face pale from exhaustion, voice steady despite it. "Welcome," he said with a tired smile. "We've got 70 patients. Some of them are yours." She blinked, unsure what he meant. "Ours? Japanese soldiers," he replied. "And Americans, too. Here we don't separate by flag." Even after everything she'd seen, the word struck her like a slap. No separation? She'd spent her entire life told that enemies were monsters, that compassion was for one's own people. Yet here she was, standing in a ward where wounded men from both sides lay side by side, each breathing, bleeding, healing. The first week was chaos wrapped in discipline. Aiko worked beside American nurses who spoke quickly and moved faster. They showed her things she'd never seen before. Penicillin, sterilized gloves, new wound dressings that didn't need boiling. They didn't mock her accent or her hesitation. They simply showed, corrected, taught. At first, she copied their motions in silence, terrified of making a mistake. Every instruction felt like a test she could fail. But one evening, when a young Japanese soldier began convulsing from infection, instinct took over. She shouted orders in Japanese, slapped the table to get attention, and called for water and cloth. The American nurses froze for half a second, then followed her lead. Together, they cooled the fever, steadied the breathing, and watched the color return to the soldier's face. When it was over, Hayes appeared beside her. "Good call, Nurse Tanaka," he said, clapping her shoulder gently. It was the first time anyone in an American uniform had said her name with respect. For a moment, she forgot she was a prisoner. Days turned to weeks. Aiko began to move with quiet confidence. The Americans showed her modern techniques, and she showed them the small, enduring tricks of her own training. Herbal compresses for burns, cooling packs for heat stroke, breathing methods for pain. It was an unspoken exchange built not on politics but practicality. At night, when the lights dimmed, she started keeping a notebook again. Each page was a bridge between languages, half English, half Japanese. She wrote words like kindness, sterility, mercy, concepts she was only beginning to understand fully. One afternoon, as she wrote, an American nurse named Evelyn Brooks leaned over and asked, "What are you writing?" "Things I don't want to forget," Aiko replied softly. Evelyn smiled, took her pen, and added a line in neat handwriting. "The body doesn't care about flags." By Christmas of 1945, the camp at Guam had transformed from a field hospital into something sacred. The war was over on paper, but not in the hearts of those who lived through it. The tents still smelled of disinfectant and salt, but now there was laughter too, faint, hesitant, real. American and Japanese soldiers sang carols in broken English. Someone strummed a guitar. For the first time in years, Aiko heard music instead of gunfire. That night, she wrote in her notebook, "Maybe peace sounds like this." A few days later, an order arrived. The Japanese medical personnel were to be transferred to the Philippines for repatriation. The news fell over the ward like a shadow. Even the patients who had once feared them seemed quieter that day. When the time came to leave, Aiko found Hayes in the supply room. He was standing by a crate of bandages, his uniform wrinkled, his expression unreadable. "You'll be going home soon," he said softly. She looked at the floor. "Home feels far away," he nodded, reaching into his pocket. When his hand emerged, it held a small Red Cross badge, its edges worn smooth. "Keep this," he said. "Proof that for a little while you worked for humanity, not for flags." Aiko took it with both hands and bowed deeply. "When I see wounded again," she whispered, "I will remember how you healed them. All of them," he smiled faintly. "Then you'll remember the best part of the war." The transport ship left Guam under a bruised sky. From the deck, Aiko watched the shoreline fade into darkness. She pressed the Red Cross badge to her chest, feeling its cool metal against her skin. It was small but heavy with meaning, the weight of what she had learned, and what she was leaving behind. When the lights of the American camp disappeared behind the horizon, she opened her notebook one last time. Her handwriting shook with the roll of the sea as she wrote, "I thought mercy was weakness, but I saw it save the world." Tokyo, spring 1947. The city still looked like a skeleton, half its bones turned to ash. Streets that once bustled with color now stretched silent under the gray sky. Yet amid the ruins, a new kind of life was beginning to take root. The Red Cross Civilian Hospital had been rebuilt with help from the American Occupation Administration. The building was small, its paint peeling, but it stood straight. To Aiko, it felt like the first heartbeat of peace. She arrived early on her first day, dressed in a new uniform. White cap, Red Cross stitched neatly above her heart. As she stepped into the ward, her breath caught. The smell of antiseptic, the hum of generators, the soft murmur of nurses. It was all familiar, but this time it belonged to a world no longer at war. A senior officer greeted her at the door. "Miss Tanaka," he said, scanning her file. "You were trained in Guam under Lieutenant Hayes?" She nodded. "Good," he said with a faint smile. "We need that kind of difference here." That word, difference, echoed in her mind all morning. The hospital's rhythm was slower, more deliberate. There were no soldiers here, only civilians, children, mothers, the elderly. Aiko's English was better now, her hands steadier, but her heart trembled when she saw the faces of her countrymen. Some looked at her with suspicion. They saw the American techniques she used and called her tainted. One doctor, during a staff meeting, spoke sharply. "You bow too easily to them," he said. "You have forgotten who you are." Aiko met his gaze and answered calmly, "If remembering who I am means forgetting what I learned, then I choose to forget." The room went silent. Even the American advisor stopped writing. No one challenged her again. Weeks passed. Then one morning, a convoy of trucks arrived outside the hospital. American doctors, part of a new medical exchange program. Aiko stood near the entrance as they stepped down, sunlight flashing off their badges. And then she froze. Robert Hayes, older, leaner, with the same steady eyes as was among them. Their eyes met for the first time in almost 2 years. He smiled. "You made it," she bowed slightly. "And you kept your oath." They worked together again, this time under no flags, no guards, no watchtowers. Side by side, they trained new Japanese nurses, teaching sterilization, modern surgery, and something rarer: empathy. One afternoon, Hayes stood before a class, drawing a circle on the chalkboard. Inside he wrote, "Compassion, Tokyo, 1952. The war was a memory most tried to forget, but for Aiko Tanaka it lived quietly in her hands. They no longer trembled when she held a scalpel. They no longer hesitated when they touched a stranger's wound. Those same hands that once carried fear now carried peace. The Red Cross Hospital had grown into a symbol, a place where the world's scars met healing instead of hatred. American and Japanese nurses worked side by side, their voices blending into one rhythm. Every day, Aiko walked its halls, watching patients recover not from bullets but from bitterness. One morning, a ceremony was held in the hospital courtyard. A soft breeze moved through the cherry blossoms as Lieutenant Robert Hayes, now older and slower, presented Aiko with a bronze medallion engraved with 6 words. When the applause faded, Hayes turned to her quietly. "You once told me you thought mercy was weakness." Aiko smiled, her eyes bright with tears. "And you told me mercy stops the bleeding." He nodded. "Looks like you were right, too. It's stronger than any army." That evening, long after the ceremony ended, Aiko walked alone through the quiet corridors. The lamps cast warm pools of light across the white walls. From one